Hello everybody, this is Ensign Rickey, your YouTube resident redshirt, and welcome back to the Lower Decks. And in today's video, I am glad to announce that the wait is finally over. Season 4 of The Expanse has dropped in its entirety on Amazon. Now, I had high expectations going into the show for Season 4, and let me tell you, they did not disappoint at all. Now, the fact that they dropped the whole season at once might be a deterrent to some YouTubers out there that like to do week-to-week episode reviews. But in today's video, I'm going to be reviewing the Season 4 opener, New Terra. So, as I dive into this review, be warned, there will be both heavy book and show spoilers throughout this video. So if you haven't caught up to this point with the book or the show, I suggest you do so before moving on. Now, with that all said and out the way, let's take a look, shall we, into the Season 4 Expanse opener, New Terra.
This is a dangerous mission, and it's likely one of us will be killed. The landing party will consist of myself, Mr. Spock, Dr. McCoy, and Ensign Rickey.
Ah, crap.
Air date and episode number. This episode first aired on December 13th, 2019, along with the rest of the season. This is the first episode of the 4th season out of a total of 10 episodes. This season contains all the events that take place in the 2014 novel, See Ebola Burn, by James S.04. See Ebola Burn is also the 4th book in the Expanse novel series out of a total of 8 currently. Book 9 will hopefully drop next year and close out the entire series. This season also respectively contains some parts of the 2012 novella Gods of Risk. The novel series itself has subbooks, which they have dubbed as novellas, which describe events that take place outside and in between the main story novels. There are currently 7 novellas in the Expanse saga, and they have a role-playing game based on the series as well. So in total, there are currently 15 books altogether that make up the entire series. This season also throws us a few treats as well, as they have a few scenes that begin to start the events that take place in the next book, or respectively the next season, which is named Nemesis Games, which was first released in 2015. With the almost instant green light given to them for Season 5 by Amazon, our beloved show finally gets just a little breathing room after the sci-fi cancellation in Season 3. So with that being said, let's jump into directors, writers, and special guest actors. Now it's time to give that nod of acknowledgement to the people behind the scenes that make The Expanse happen. I do this for my Trek-related videos as well. I always make it a point to give a shout out to the directors, writers, and guest actors of the episode. The Expanse is a little different from Trek in the aspect of writing too. Star Trek shows would draw stories from a pool of writers in a writer's room, and people would come and go on Trek shows quite frequently. From what I can gather through sources like IMDb, The Expanse has significantly less people working on it. The story itself was originally written by Ty Frink and Daniel Abraham under the pen name James S.04. But for the television adaptation, Ty and Daniel enlisted the help of Star Trek alumni Nareen Shankar, who also has writing credits on the series. Nareen would become an executive producer for the show from the beginning. They would also enlist the help of writer-producers Mark Fergus and Hawk Otsby to help develop the series for a TV format. These 5 people would spearhead the production of the show extensively. In the future, I plan to do an introduction into the Expanse video, as I have done with my past Trek vids, where I can break down the show's producers, main actors, and writers. Since the Expanse crew is significantly smaller than any Trek show, I should be able to knock it all out in one video. But also, this is a lot easier to do for Trek shows because of the information available on Trek. I can look at any episode of Trek on Memory Alpha and get all the act breakdowns, facts, trivia, and tons of other information in a heartbeat. Most of the wikis they have out for The Expanse right now are pretty much like a barren desert with little water to be found. I wish I can get more behind the scenes information on The Expanse to have more accurate information in my videos, as I like to get as many facts as I can right. But until the show blows up a little more in popularity, I fear our information will be limited, because much like The Investigator, I reach out, maybe not 113 times a second, but I definitely dig for as much info as I can before making a video. So, For simplicity's sake on today's episode, I will just jump into the director of this episode. I will have another video soon that covers all the writers, actors, and producers of the show. Since the crew is not nearly as large or as established as some other franchises out there, The Expanse should be a little easier than most. So, unlike writers, producers, and actors on a television series, directors usually swap out from episode to episode, working on many different projects. Television is a producer's medium, as where the show's producers make all the decisions for the show and how it's all run. So television directors just come in and direct episode and leave, basically. The movies, however, are a director's medium, and it's the director of the film that's calling all the shots, as the producers have a much more limited capacity on the big screen. So, without further ado, the director. This episode was directed by Breck Eisner. Breck Eisner is an American director, and his career spans for over 20 years. He has worked on projects in both television and film. Eisner is a California native and is the son of former Walt Disney CEO Michael Eisner. He attended Georgetown University, majoring in both theater and film. He also attended Southern California University, receiving a master's degree in film production. This, however, is not the only time that we have seen Eisner's work on The Expanse. In addition to this episode, Eisner is also credited with 3 other Season 4 episodes. Eisner has also worked on 2 episodes of Season 2 and 2 episodes of Season 3 as well. The last episode he directed before this was the 3rd season episode, IFF, and the next time we will see him is in the next episode, Jetsam. Eisner currently holds the title for most episodes directed of The Expanse, at a total of 9 episodes. He is followed closely by another director we will discuss later on down the line, Jeff Woolinow, who has directed 8 episodes himself. Other than his work on The Expanse, Eisner has worked on such projects as The Invisible Man, The Last Witch Hunter, and The Brave. Story breakdown. Okay, so it looks like the story's broken down into the usual 5 acts and a teaser, like most television. As to where these act breaks happen, I could find no information anywhere on the net, so I will do my best to place them. From what I can tell by the information available, the events of the book and the show take place around the years 2353 and 2354. They are no way exact on the actual dates, but many fans of the series have speculated and put together a timeline for other fans to follow. I extrapolated all that data the best I could to get this information as accurate as possible. A majority of the story takes place on or in orbit of the newly found habitable world, S.04, otherwise known as New Terra. We left off last season with James Holden opening the ring gates by disabling the station in the middle of the ring space. So, with 1,300 new wormhole-like portals to other parts of the galaxy, or perhaps other galaxies now open, humanity begins a new major era of colonization and exploration. Humans begin sending probes through the rings to investigate, and as soon as that probe information comes back and a new habitable planet is found, refugees from the conflict on Ganymede instantly take off for the gates in hopes to make this their new home. Left with no options since many ports are closed and refuse to take them in, refugees risk their lives to reach Illis, or New Terra. This is where the adventure begins, and then we fade into the teaser. Okay, so we open up with a ship next to what we see as the Sol Ring as the camera pans out, and I must admit, the cinematography is absolutely phenomenal throughout this whole show, especially in this season. And then we pan over to a fleet of ships, and we find out that they are heading toward the ring. A voice over the comlink is requesting for the ships, which we now know are Belter ships, to stand down because they are entering restricted space and they will be fired upon. Ignoring the plea, the ships fire up their drives and head straight for the ring. Again, these scenes are absolutely beautiful. The blockading UNN ships guarding the ring open fire on the approaching Belter vessels, and this is awesome because we get to see their railguns fire. One of the Belter ships takes a hit and veers off, but the others make it through the blockading UNN ships. They finally enter the ring after taking a few losses. Once the Belter ships enter the ring space, we get a nice shot of Medina Station, the ship that was formerly known as the Behemoth, and also the Nauvoo. The ships sail right past the station. We zoom onto the side of a ship and see the name that's written on the hull. It's called the Barbapicola. We head inside the ship and find out that this is a Belter refugee ship and it's filled with the refugees from the recent disaster at Ganymede. The voice comes over the comm and asks again for the Barbacola to stand down. The captain of the ship responds to them and tells them they are unarmed refugees. Then we get our first shot of Lucia Felsia, and her husband Jacob. We can see that young Felsia is clearly distressed by the situation. Lucia comforts her, saying that they will be okay and that they will make it through this together. And then on a terminal, Drummer comes over the comm and orders the pursuing UNN ship to stand down, as well as the Belter vessel. Drummer explains to the UNN ship that they don't have clearance to fire in the ring space. And then the Belter woman explains that they will not stand down and that they have been begging for a place to stay since the fall of Ganymede. A Belter man in the back follows up with saying, if you are going to kill us, then do it now, or just leave us be. All the Belters on the ship start chanting go to the captain, who nods in agreement, and then he smashes the button and the ship's drive fires up. The ships, which are almost through the ring, start getting fired upon and another ship goes down. With weapons fire all around them, the Barbacola makes it through the ring and begins its journey to S.04, or New Terra. The other ships break off the pursuit of the Barbacola as it fires up its drive and takes off. Act 1. And then we head to Earth and Luna, but 8 months later, we get a scene with James Holden and one of his many mothers having a small discussion around a campfire, talking a little bit about Naomi and her struggles with dealing with Earth's high gravity. Jim's mother then hands him a book to read. It's Don Quixote. She explains this is for his next long trip. His mother then asks him what he's seen out there, to which Jim responds, it's hard to put into words. Thunder breaks this up as it begins to rain. Holden's mom gives him a hug and heads inside. He goes to put out the campfire, but experiences a flashback to all the rings in the ring space. We get some crazy flashbacks of planets and a bunch of other things. Then we head back to the campfire as we get our first shot of our beloved Belter investigator, Miller. Miller tells Holden that they need to talk about the ride he proposed last season, and that's the next clue of the case. Holden then responds and says they are leaving tomorrow to go to New York City to talk to Christian Eversarala. Miller then asks Holden to ask her to go to the rings. Holden says he's already asked her, but he'll try again. Miller then reaffirms his need for a ride. As the rain starts to come down, Miller then wonders to himself how rain tastes. Miller starts to respond that it's beautiful, but then he gets pulled back on track by the proto-molecule again, asking Holden for that ride. Holden then tells Miller that he will work on it. And then we head up into the Rocinante, which is in Earth's orbit, and then we see Naomi talking to all of Holden's parents via the comlink. After some small talk, Holden comes on the screen and tells her that he will see her soon. After the call finally ends, we see that the Rossi has a new splash screen for its comm terminals, and it is great. And then we head up to the cockpit, where we see Alex, who's about to test the Rossi's new railgun weapon. He's talking to Amos while he's conducting the test. He's testing the new thrust compensator to see if it absorbs the shock of the railgun blast. Then we get a nice shot of a floating personal comm terminal. It begins to ring, and Amos reaches out to grab it. He looks to see who's calling him, and finds out that it's Clarissa Mao calling. And on a side note, I love this little bit of technology we get in the Expanse. It just makes so much sense to take your hand comm, point it at a screen, and wave it over. So, Clarissa Mao and Amos have a small conversation because she's calling from her incarceration on Earth for her previous crimes last season. She thanks Amos for helping her overcome the darker side of herself through the events of last season, even though she's paying for it now. This little scene is great and sort of a treat. I will go over more on this later. Amos then gives her some words of encouragement, and then Clarissa tells Amos that she has to go and asks if she can call him again, to which Amos says, sure thing, Peaches. Yet another little treat. Amos thinks about the conversation he just had. And then we head back to New York City on Earth, into the UN building, where we see a meeting taking place between Christian and all the other high-ranking officials. Eversarala looks down to the datapad and writes to someone. The message is, where the fuck is he? And all I have to say to this is, yes. We finally get to see Eversarala unleashed. Thank you, Amazon. One of the people at the meeting, named Nancy, tries to start a conversation with Christian about giving the people of Earth a chance to expand through the gates, because it's the biggest opportunity that Earth's had in over 100 years. She continues on to say that more than half the planet is unemployed, and this is a chance to give them a job. Christian shuts her right down, saying it's still too dangerous, and that even Christopher Columbus knew that what laid on the other side for him was still human. They argue over the point a little more, and then Christian finally ends the meeting by saying that they are all going to do exactly what she said they're going to do. Christian's pad finally rings, telling her that Holden has finally arrived. With that, everybody gets up at the meeting and leaves. And then we head into Christian's office as she's talking to Holden. Did I mention I love the tech in this show? The holographic consoles and projection displays look phenomenal. She explains the situation with the Barbacola and the Ganymede refugees. She tells them that 100 or so refugees survived and made the trip to the planet to settle. She adds that they named the planet S.04 and that the planet is completely filled with lithium deposits and they are mining them. Holden doesn't think too much of the story at first until she tells him what else they found. She throws on a display and it reads classified. And then we see many images of proto-molecule-like structures appear on the screen. Holden replies that it looks inactive, and then Christian replies that for 300 years they thought that Phoebe was just a ball of ice orbiting Saturn. If you have followed the story up to this point, that's where the remnants of the first proto-molecule was found. Then Christian finally comes out and tells Holden that she wants him to go to Ilus. She asks Holden if he's still talking to Miller. Holden replies more like he talks to me. She goes on to discuss with Holden that basically he's the proto-molecule specialist, and she wants to know what the fuck is going on down there. She wants to know if Ilus is a ghost town, or if this can turn into another incident like Eros. Holden then asks her, what if this is another Eros? Christian tells him to evacuate the Belters, destroy the proto-molecule if you can, and then get the hell out of there. Holden nods in acceptance, and then we fade into Act 2. And then we head back to the Rocinante, which is still in orbit around the Earth, and she looks gorgeous. What a beautiful shot. We head inside and see Amos is putting the new ship's plaque up, and this is one of the shots we've seen in the teaser. Holden makes it back to the Roci and sees Amos installing the plaque and then says, it's a good thing that Aversarala cleaned up the Roci salvage claim for them. And then Amos, out of nowhere, asks Holden how Christian looked and what she was wearing. Holden is kind of thrown off by this question and doesn't even know how to respond. So instead he says, it's good to be home. Holden gets everybody together on the bridge and explains the situation. He tells everyone that there is already another ship en route called the Edward Israel, a signed ship out of Titan. He goes on to tell everyone that since he's the one that opened the gates, he's responsible. Naomi then responds that they are all responsible for opening the gates. Holden starts to make a plan saying that he and Amos are going down with the crew of the Edward Israel, and Naomi and Alex will stay in orbit. Naomi instantly tells him that she's going to the surface as well. Holden and the rest of the crew seem pretty concerned about this. She then tells everyone that she will be fine, and since it's a long trip, she will have time to prepare. She goes on to say that there are 1,300 new systems out there, and she doesn't want to see them all just from orbit. Alex then says they need to rig the Roci for an unassisted landing. Amos says he knows a guy in Luna, and then Holden tells him to give him a call. With that, Amos and Alex depart, and we get a nice scene between Naomi and Holden. Naomi then assures Holden that whatever happens down there, they will do it together. And then we open up with a beautiful shot of Mars, and then we enter into what looks like a factory of some sort, with Bobby hard at work on the weld. And then we pan back out and see what Bobby is really working on, which turns out to be a ship, and this whole shot is beautiful. And then we get a nice shot of the Mars transport system as transport cars fly back and forth on the rails. Again, gorgeous. Inside the transport, we see Bobby, who is now off work and headed home. And then she looks over to a display on the wall and sees that the MCRN is en route to the ring on an unknown mission. And then some random guy looks over at her as she leaves on her stop. Off the transport, we open up into a huge section of the station, and Bobby heads off. She finally makes it to her place and enters. When Bobby walks in, we finally get to see her brother for the first time, and then we figure out that this is his house and that she's staying with him temporarily. Her brother asks her to keep a lookout for David, who is his son and Bobby's nephew. She agrees, and he takes off. David comes in to eat real quick, but is interrupted by the doorbell, as he mentions that his girlfriend is here. Kind of skeptical, Bobby watches as David answers the door and calls out for David's girlfriend to enter. David's girlfriend comes in and introduces herself. They both leave, and then Bobby gets a call on her hand terminal. It's Alex from the Rocinante. And yet we get another one of my favorite common sense future tech moments as Bobby swipes Alex's call to the wall terminal from her handcom. We get to see quite a few cool new gadgets throughout this whole season, which is awesome. Bobby and Alex catch up for a bit and talk about the current mission to Ilus. Another cool little thing in this scene is the light delay meter for the communication in the lower right corner of the screen. The delay starts acting up, and the call gets cut short after a few words with each other, and then we fade into Act 3. Okay, now we head over to the belt. Then a ship comes into view for a second, and then we zoom out onto another ship, which we see is the Amberjack. The first ship is sending out a message over the comm for the Amberjack to respond and stand down. The first ship finally makes it over to the Amberjack, and then we look inside and we see that Ashford is in command of the ship and he's the one sending the hails. He's telling the Amberjack that they have target lock on them and to stand down and prepare to be boarded. Instead of answering Ashford's hail, the Amberjack fires up its drive and takes off. Ashford commands his crew to pursue the fleeing ship. The Amberjack fires a missile at Ashford, but his PDCs take care of the threat. But in its place, it leaves a field of shrapnel that Ashford's ship has to fly through. Ashford then brings the targeting console down and gets a lock on the Amberjack's engine as he fires his kinetics to take out the Amberjack's drive, slowing it to a crawl. With the Amberjack now disabled, Ashford asks the crew to ready the grapple line. But before he can fire, he sees that the Amberjack is starting to overload its engines, in hopes of taking out his ship, but Ashford gets out in time. And now the Amberjack without a drive, and many of its crew dead and floating in the vacuum of space, the chase is over. Ashford scans the wreckage for survivors and finds out that one of the Amberjack's crew is still alive. He retrieves the survivor and has him brought to the bridge so he can talk to him. He's a belter. And then he asks Ashford if they pay him a lot to attack his own people, and that he is basically the UN lapdog. Ashford explains that 3 ships plus 1 of his own were attacked on this route, and he wants to know by who. Though he attempts to get the information from the captive reveals very little information. And then we get a shot of the Rosie as it approaches the Sol ring gate. We head inside and see that Alex is at the helm, as a voice calls over the comm and asks for his clearance code to pass through the blockade. Alex transmits his code, and then we get a scene with Holden and Naomi in the Rossie's medbay as Holden is injecting her with a serum that will increase her bone density and mass to be able to withstand the gravity of Illis. We see the procedure looks very painful. We look at the screen and see a readout of the procedure on the medical display. We also see that Naomi is still under acceptable levels needed to walk on the surface. Holden asks Naomi if she needs a break, but on the wall terminal, they both watch as the new residents of Illis are voicing their concerns about the situation. After seeing this, Naomi tells Holden to keep going with the procedure. And then we head into the ring space, where we both see the center ring station and Medina station. We open up with Kamina Drummer, just getting her shirt off, about to slip into her normal clothes. She then gets a call from Naomi. They talk for a bit because Naomi is in the ring space and there's no light delay. As Drummer slips out of her uniform, we can see the remnants of the damage she received from last season, as her back is still covered with medical tech, allowing her to heal. Naomi congratulates her on her progress in setting up the probes through the gates. Drummer then replies and says, yep, they got 30 or so probes installed already up to this point, and that leaves only 1,300 more rings left to probe. Drummer then adds that when the blockade lifts, she might put in a souvenir shop because Medina will become like a gas station of sorts. Naomi assures Drummer that it's a great command to have, and then asks her how her back is healing. Drummer replies it only hurts when she moves, but that's good, that means the nerves are regrowing. Drummer then tells Naomi that she's bound for Illis, to which Naomi replies, that's right. Drummer asks if she's going to evict the Belter refugees. Naomi says that they're just going to make sure everyone is safe. Drummer actually scoffs at this a little, saying that many of them died trying to even acclimate themselves to the planet, and they were foolish to think that they could live there in the first place. Naomi then responds with that it's not foolish to want free air or a home for their children. Drummer then tells Naomi that they are creatures of space, and in 2 generations, their children will be inners. Naomi then says everyone should have a right to decide for themselves. After this conversation, they say their Belter goodbyes, and then we get a beautiful shot of the Rocinante's new splash screen on the terminal. And then we head over to Holden, who is reading the incoming messages from the people on New Terra, trying to explain the situation. And then we open up into the ring space and see the Rocinante flying past one of the new probes they have installed in the ring gates. You can see that the probes extend out through the gate themselves like an arm. As the Rosie heads towards the Illis gate, we get a little scene with Holden injecting the anti-cancer meds through his medical injection port on his arm. And then we get a scene of the Rosie passing through the gate on the other side, as we go back to Holden and see the effect happen on the ship as Holden's face passes through the gate as well. The Rosie then enters into the Illis system and begins its journey towards S.04. As soon as they are through the gate, Holden finally gets another visit from Proto Miller. Holden tells Miller that they are through the gate and they should arrive in a few weeks. Miller then says, thanks for the ride, and then he will let Holden know what to do next. And then we get an image of what the proto-molecule actually sees when it looks around, as Miller's essence heads off to the new planet. And then we fade into Act 4. Then we head back to Mars as we see Bobby is at the bar drinking alone. She notices the same man that was on the transport is in the bar with her. He's right behind her at a table, and she can feel him staring at her. She comes out and asks the gentleman if he's got anything to say to her. He seems taken back by the comment. He then asks her if he could buy her another beer. And then Bobby looks back to the bar with this look like, oh fuck, here we go. Bobby goes and sits at the table with him and finds out that he's ex-military, just like her, and he was recently let go with the rest of his squad because of the recent events on Mars with the discovery of the new ring gates. They have a small talk about Mars and its current state and how it's failing, and a little about Bobby's decision that forced her to leave the military as well. Bobby is less upset because she feels that what she did was right, and she can stand by that even though it cost her a career in the MCRN. She then follows up with, that's what Marines do. They go on for a bit more over a drink, and he asks her what she's seen inside the ring station, to which Bobby replies, nothing that makes sense, and then finally tells him that it was a bunch of people just killing each other over what they don't understand. With that, Bobby tells him to keep his uniform in tip-top shape, because there's more wars coming. And then we head back to space and see Ashford's ship next to the Sol Ring Gate. Ashford and his crew are listening to news feeds coming in on the terminal about the peace with the Inners and if it's worth hunting their own people down. We also get a shot of Fred Johnson and Anderson Doss on the screen as the news feed plays out. This gets all interrupted, however, as a message comes over the comms, asking for the confirmation code to pass through the ring blockade. Ashford lets the message play out to a warning before he sends his code just to antagonize the Inners a bit. We also find out that his ship is named the Tian. They clear his code and Ashford heads to Medina Station, and we get a beautiful shot with the Tian docked at Medina. Ashford enters and is met by Drummer, who tells him to stop antagonizing the Inners because they have a treaty. Ashford goes on to say that the treaty doesn't even help the Belters. Drummer tells him that he's got to trust his gut, to which Ashford replies, the last time he did that, it didn't turn out so well. She tries to comfort him by saying that we were all flying blind, and the only reason we made it was because her friend's boyfriend had an imaginary friend that told him how to shut the ring station down. Ashford tells her that he thought Holden was a madman, but it turned out he became a prophet. Drummer then tells him it's possible to be both. And then we open up with a beautiful shot of S.04 with the Edward Israel in orbit. As we pan down to see the ship, we see that a shuttle is being launched from the ship. The shuttle begins its long descent down to Illis. It hits the atmosphere and prepares for its braking burn down to the landing pad. Then inside the shuttle, we get to see our first shot of Elvie Okoye and the rest of the RCE crew headed to the surface. Next to her is Fayez, who's a little shaken up about the shuttle ride to the surface. And then we pan up to the second level of the shuttle, and we get our first shot of the story's main antagonist, Adolphus Mertry, the RCE security commander. He's having a conversation with an officer next to him about his past mission, and that he hopes that this mission will go successfully. And then we get a shot of the shuttle coming down as it's making its final descent to the pad. And then suddenly, the shuttle starts to shake as shrapnel starts tearing through the hull, killing a couple people in the process. More breaches come through the floor, and everyone is in fear for their lives at this point. And then we pan up to Mertry, who's looking above him as a piece of debris flew past his head and barely missed him, and tears a hole through the ceiling. The crew begins to lock hands with each other. Elvie is holding the hand of the woman right next to her, but in less than a second, the bulkhead behind the lady gives away, and Elvie realizes she's not holding anyone's hand anymore. It's just a big gaping hole. Mertry braces himself on a railing and looks down as the shuttle's floor gives away and sees all the supplies in the shuttle starting to get sucked out the hold. The screen goes black, and then we get a couple nice aerial shots of Illis' landscape and the alien ruins. And then we head to the crash side of the shuttle as Mertry walks through the wreckage. He's tore up pretty bad and starts looking for the others. He looks down to find the gentleman he was just talking to on the shuttle is dead and impaled on a piece of debris. We pan out and start getting a scope of the damage. Fayez wakes up to look around, and he's in bad shape as well, as his arm is not even moving. Elvie is still laid about her crash couch, unconscious. An electric spark flares, and she instantly wakes up. But before she can register what even happened, Lucia finds her and comes to her aid, putting a breathing mask on her. Back on the Rocinante, Holden and the crew are watching the newsfeed as the story starts coming in over the center terminal. They watch as people walk through the wreckage and Mertry get hauled away on a stretcher. Eversarala finally appears at the screen and urges him to find out what happened and urges him to get there quick. She also tells Holden not to put his dick in it because it's fucked enough already, and ends the message. Amos looks up and says, "That's good advice." And then we fade into Act 5. Okay, we open up with the Rocinante on its final approach to Illis. This is the sequence that we've seen from the San Diego Comic-Con trailer. Alex is at the helm and decides to test the railgun before they reach Ilus. He selects a target asteroid on the display, and then he fires the shot. The recoil from the railgun rocks the Rocinante, and Alex is amused because the recoil test was successful. We see the shot hit on the display, and the asteroid starts to break apart. And then we get a scene with Naomi working out to be able to withstand the effects of Ilus's gravity. On the medical terminal, we now see that she is well within the acceptable limits after all the treatments she went through. And then we get a shot of Amos in the armory, doing final weapon checks. Then we get a beautiful shot of the Roci over Ilus as he gets ready to begin his descent to the surface. The crew then begins to strap into their crash couches for the landing. The Roci breaks into the atmosphere, and this whole landing sequence is absolutely phenomenal. The Roci looks absolutely gorgeous throughout this whole scene. As they're about to land, Holden is checking out the terminal displays as the information scans are coming in from the surface. As the Roci begins to break through the clouds, Mercury wakes up in the medical clinic, tears tubes off his arms, grabs his coat, and then leaves. Lucia and some of the other Belter colonists also watch the Roci come in as well. The Roci finally lands in a small canyon. The Roci's doors open up, and we get a shot of Naomi, who's temporarily blinded by the light. She's been used to the darkness of space her whole life, and this is the first time she's ever walked planetside. She finally gets her bearings and steps out, and the crew follows behind her. She looks up to the sky and stumbles for a bit because, again, she's not used to the concept of a sky above her. She gets back up and looks back to Holden, who is watching her get used to the gravity and smiling at her. They all walk down the ramp and look around at Ilus. Holden goes down to pick up some rocks and dirt just to feel it, and then we pan back to another amazing shot with both the Rocinante and her crew together. Then we get some overhead shots as the crew makes their way to the settlement. I have to admit, they did a wonderful job with the landscapes on Ilus. It really has that alien look and feel to it. And then we pan up when they finally make it to the settlement, which is called First Landing. The crew starts walking through the town, and a man instantly emerges from one of the structures, accusing Holden of coming to take their land away. They continue walking, and people are starting to gather in the center of the town to greet Holden. The guy continues to walk with Holden, accusing him, but Holden and Naomi assure him that they're here to help. Then Carol Chiwiwi comes up and introduces herself to Holden. A second later, Mercury comes up and introduces himself as well. After the short introductions, we get Coop, who seems to be the resident troublemaker, as he riles up the crowd to chant traitor, aiming their hate at Mercury and his company. And then from out of nowhere, one of the Belters picks up a rock and throws it at Mercury and hits him in the face. And then instantly, everyone in the group draws their weapons on each other in a good old-fashioned Mexican standoff. As the tension starts getting out of hand, everyone looks up and we see what looks like a swarm of bugs, and it's about to descend on the camp. And then we get a nice aerial shot above the swarm as it descends down into the camp. As the swarm hits the small town, everyone instantly drops to the ground in cover as the bugs start tearing through everyone and everything. The swarm finally stops, and we can see that everyone was cut up by the attack. As people start to get up, everyone starts to holster their weapons again, as the hostilities cease for the moment. As everyone starts to recover, Holden sees one of the creatures stuck in the side of a barrel. He pulls it out and lifts it up to inspect it, and he sees it's partly metal. And then we cut to black. The end. Television show to novel series comparison. Okay, now that the main story is over, I can get into a segment that will be exclusive to my Expanse content, the television show to novel series comparison. In this part of the video, I plan to do a parallel discussion that notes the differences from the book to the show. This segment will have heavy spoilers from the book, so if you haven't read them, you have been warned. Take note though, because I'm only going to parallel the book story up to this point in the show. So for example, this episode ends when everybody gathers in the center of the town to meet the Roci crew when they arrive at First Landing. So I will only cover and discuss details and events that take place up to this point in the novel series as well. I'm doing this for all the people who want to see the actual comparison, and for all the people who love the show but are not book readers, or just don't want to read the books and would like to know. I know more than a few people personally that are just not book people or just don't have the time to read it or audiobook it. With that being said, there are a couple things to take note of when comparing the television show to the novel series. So, let's take a look, shall we? Key differences. Okay, here are a couple key factors to keep in mind when you compare the novel series to the television series. The numbers presented in the novel series are dramatically scaled up as compared to the television show, at least most of the time. A couple examples are: A. In the Eros incident from Season 1, or the Leviathan Wakes novel, the number of people affected by the protomolecule on the station is roughly 1.5 million people in the books, and roughly 100,000 people in the television show. And B. The trip time from the Ilus Ring to S.04 is approximately over 2 months in the books, 72.8 days to be exact, and roughly about 3 weeks in the television show. The technobabble in the books is a lot thicker than it is in the show, so if you are like me and love digging into future sci-fi tech, the dialogue in the books is far better than what we get in the show, which shouldn't come as a surprise. The show and the books all keep the main storyline the same. What changes is the path they take to get to that point sometimes. Keep in mind though, and especially this season, that there's a lot of stuff in the show now that doesn't happen in the book. In my opinion, this is awesome because this is like bonus content that we didn't get to see or read about, technically, in the book. And some of that newly added stuff is literally like a basket of golden Easter eggs to people who have read the books. Now, let's take a look at the fundamental differences. Okay, let's get into the fundamental differences. These are the differences that are dramatically different from the novel series to the television series this season. Let's start with some of the main characters that didn't make it to the show from the novel series. The first thing I noticed from this episode is that there is no Baja or Jacek Merton. Baja gets replaced by Lucia's husband Jacob. Lucia, in addition to her own storyline, also picks up Baja's storyline and plays out his parts from the book. The Merton family in the previous book consisted of Baja and Lucia and their 3 children, Katoa, Felsia, and Jacek. Katoa dies during the Ganymede incident as one of the test subjects for the protomolecule under Dr. Strickland, but in the book, Felsia and Jacek arrive on Ilus along with Baja and Lucia. So, the Merton family in the show consists of Lucia, Jacob, and Felsia, with no Jacek and with no previous ties or mentions to Katoa or the Ganymede incident. Also this season, there is no Havelock in the television show. In the book, Miller's old partner from series, Havelock, takes a contract with RCE and heads for Ilus 4. He comes aboard the Edward Israel and is part of Murtry's security team. So, Havelock is cut from the season entirely. Also, later in the season, we get very little action aboard the Edward Israel compared to what we get in the book. A good portion of the book takes place on the Edward Israel in orbit of Ilus 4. We also get to meet the captain of the Edward Israel in the books. His name is Marwick, and he is cut from the show as well. Even though he is mentioned in the show, the head of both the OPA and Tycho Station, Fred Johnson, does not make an appearance this season. OPA's second in command, Anderson Dawes, is also mentioned but does not appear. However, Fred Johnson does appear in this book. Also, Bobby Draper is in all of Season 4, and in the book, she has a very small part. We do get a spin take on Bobby's novella, Gods of Risk, throughout this whole season. It's not exactly the same story from the novella that we see in the show, but it has some elements of it. In fact, this is one of those golden Easter eggs I mentioned earlier, as Cibola Byrne has very little of Bobby at all, so for me, it's like an extra piece of the novel I would have never got to read. Bonus if you ask me. Ashford and Drummer are also present throughout the whole season, and they are nowhere to be found in the book. They also have a unique position this season, and I love the added story development it brought for Ashford. I don't think he's even mentioned again after the last book, but Drummer, on the other hand, becomes an important figure later on in the books. But their whole story arc pretty much this season serves the purpose of introducing what's going to happen next season. This is not at all in the book, and I'm glad they gave Ashford some more character development as well. And Drummer, she's absolutely gorgeous, and who the hell doesn't want more Cara G as Drummer? She's killing it. Again, another golden Easter egg for the book readers. Now, let's head into the story. The teaser. In the show. We start out the show with the Barbabicola and the other refugee ships making their run on the gate, and many of them are getting disabled by the UN blockading ships guarding the ring. This happens as well in the book, but we don't get a description of how it goes down or any type of sequence like this. So, another Easter egg for us book readers. In the book. So, in the book, we open up with Bobby on Mars, but this little intro with Bobby's family is pretty much all we get out of her in the book until the very end of the book. Act 1. In the show. After the intro, we open up with Holden and the Rossi crew on Earth. They meet with Avasarala and get the mission to head to Ilos to evacuate the Belters and destroy any protomolecule they encounter, in attempts to avoid another incident like Euros. We also get a small golden egg in the form of Amos talking to Melba, aka Peaches, aka also Clarissa Mao. This is a bit of foreshadowing here for the events that will take place next season. In the book, Holden and the crew are tasked with protecting freighters headed to Medina Station in the ring space. Once at Medina Station, Fred Johnson invites Holden to come aboard and meet with him because he needs to discuss something important with him. After the meeting with Fred Johnson and listening to a short message from Avasarala, they task him to go to Ilos and keep the peace as a UPA-UN moderator. Holden is reluctant to take the job at first, saying he doesn't want to be a boot on the throat of the colonists. Miller has also been talking to Holden for quite some time by this point, and he wants Holden to go, which also makes Holden not want to go. Fred then tells Holden that this is the test case for how the rules of 1,000 planets are going to be based, and the UN will double his rate for going. Holden doesn't initially take the job here, but as soon as he gets back to the Rossi, he gets the crew together to discuss his meeting with Fred Johnson and Avasarala. The crew then decides to take the mission. Holden is still skeptical about the whole situation because he feels that the UN and the OPA are just using him as a scapegoat, and the crew also agrees with him on this. Act 2. In the show. Act 2 starts out with Bobby and her story on Mars. As I have said before, this whole storyline with Bobby is a treat to the book readers because a majority of the story didn't take place in Book 4. Also, the novella behind this, Gods of Risk, is really Bobby's nephew David's story, and the story takes place in his narrative. As I've stated before, there are similar elements between both stories, but the overall arc is quite different in the show. In the book, there's nothing really in this act to compare the book to, since Bobby's story becomes a season-wide arc for the show. We do get Bobby in Book 4, however, but only in a couple parts, the very beginning and the very end. But that's pretty much it. Act 3. In the show. The first half of Act 3 takes place around Ashford's story while he's out hunting pirates, and the second half focuses on the Rossi crew preparing and heading to the Ilos 4 gate. As I have said earlier, Ashford's continued storyline is another golden egg for the book readers. None of these events take place in the book, but they also serve a purpose of setting up the next book or season, which will be called Nemesis Games. So, another little bonus. The second half of this act revolves around the crew of the Rossi as they are preparing for the trip while headed to Ilos 4. There's another little golden egg here because of Naomi's treatments, which I will explain in a little bit. We get scenes of Holden listening to all the messages that are coming in for him to read from everyone involved in the Ilos project. When they finally pass through the ring, Miller appears to Holden, and then we get our first investigator interlude. In the book, Ashford's storyline doesn't happen in the book, so there's nothing to compare it to, but the part with the Rossi and her crew does happen. The major difference here is the time from book to show. During this segment in the book, the Rossi still has 73 days to burn while headed for Ilos, and in the show, it's about 3 weeks. During this time, they talk about Naomi and how she didn't have time to go through with the treatments to be able to sustain Ilos' gravity, and that she will never go to Earth. Dozens of more messages stream into Holden also during this trip, which brings me to Naomi. Naomi does not go to the surface in the books. Either does Alex. They both stay aboard the Rossi in orbit of Ilos. At this point in the book, Miller appears to Holden on the other side of the Ilos gate, but then we get one of our famous solo Miller interludes. They do this in the show too, but not quite the same way as the book does. As for the interludes in the book, they pretty much dedicate small chapters to all of Miller's interludes. The biggest difference being the amount of dialogue present. In the television show, we see this in the form of Miller's protomolecule vision, but on a much smaller level. But still pretty damn cool if you ask me. Act 4. In the show. Okay, so Act 4 opens up with some more of Bobby's and Ashford's storylines, so nothing here to compare to the books. The second half of the act revolves around the RCE shuttle going down to land on the surface, and the explosion at the landing that results in the crash, killing 23 people. After the shuttle crash, we get the crew of the Rossi watching the aftermath of the events on the way. However, we do get a line from Avasarala that is both in the show as well as in the book. Holden, try not to stick your dick in it because it's fucked enough already. God, I love Avasarala. Again, Thank you, Amazon. In the book. There are a lot more events that take place before we hit this point in the book. At this point in the book, we are about 7-8 chapters in. I'll break down what didn't happen in the show in a little bit, but as far as the shuttle crash in the book, pretty much the same, except that Mercury was not aboard the shuttle, and a lot less people die in the book as a result. In the show, it's 23 people dead, and in the novel series, they only suffer a handful of deaths, but among them, it was the predetermined governor of the survey mission. Mercury comes down with a team in a shuttle later after the crash. Act 5. In the show. Most of Act 5 deals with the Rossi's final approach to Ilus and finishing up with their last preparations. This whole landing sequence is absolutely gorgeous. The Rocinante has never looked better. They did a great job with all the special effects this season. Kudos, guys. Then we get another show-only treat as Naomi and Alex head to the surface with Holden and Amos. This is Naomi's first time on a planet, and Dominique Tipper played it out perfectly. Good job. And then the crew starts to head for first landing to meet with all the Belter colonists and RCE teams. Once the Rossi's crew arrives there's a small gathering in the center of the town that almost turns deadly until a swarm of alien bugs breaks it all up. And then the episode ends. In the book. In addition to what I've said about Naomi and Alex, Amos has a little moment where he's trying to bring an arsenal with him, and then Holden tells him to lighten the load a bit in hopes of not showing too much force with the colonists to make things worse than they already are. Now in the book, this little dialogue by Amos is absolutely hilarious, and I wish they had kept it in. And then in the book, we get a scene where Alex target locks to Edward Israel as soon as they get to Ilus, just to play around with him. The main differences with this scene in the town is that this is the spot in the book where Mercury kills the troublemaker Coop after a verbal threat and establishes martial law in the settlement. And in the show, this scene between Mercury and Coop takes place a little bit later. Plus, there was no metal locust swarm in the book. There are other creatures they have in the book, such as mimic lizards, and they have mosquito-like insects that bite them, but they die as soon as they do because humans are poisonous to them. We, however, don't get to see any of these creatures in the show. Excluded differences. Okay, now on to the final part of my comparison. These are all the major events in the book that take place that we don't get to see on the television show. This episode roughly covers up to 11 chapters in the book. In the book, Baja Merton is responsible for the bombing of the landing pad with Coop and the rest of the gang. Baja is also the one that smashes the button to make it blow up. And as far as Lucia in the book, she does serve as the colony's doctor, but she also plays Baja's moral anchor. She manages to keep him focused and ultimately saves him from making any more bad decisions. Before they all board the shuttle to Ilus, we get a scene on the Edward Israel where we see Elvie for the first time. Other characters that are introduced are the new colony's governor, Tyron, Mercury, Captain Marwick, and Fayez. In the book, we get all this backstory in the middle of the shuttle crash sequence. They also discuss a little backstory about the Edward Israel's 18-month trip to Ilus. After the shuttle crash sequence, we get introduced to Havelock and his backstory on the Edward Israel. We find out a little more about how he came aboard the Israel. Mercury then gets the officers together for a security briefing. Mercury sends a team down to the surface. And in the book, RCE denies Mercury's claim to use affirmative action on the Belters. But since they are a year and a half away from anywhere, Mercury still decides to play the aggressive defensive. Holden and crew go to Medina Station to meet Fred Johnson in the book. In the meeting, Fred Johnson discusses with a little message by Avasarala to send Holden to Ilus as a moderator to help set the template on how 1,000 new planets will be run. Holden doesn't want to go because Miller wants him to go. Miller at this point has been in Holden's head for 2 years. They ultimately decide to take the job, and according to Amos in the book, the money's good. And then we get a small interlude with Baja in a meeting with the other Belter conspirators trying to figure out what to do next. With the UNOPA moderator on the way, they all decide to keep mining more lithium until the moderator arrives. A little later after the meeting, Baja heads home to talk to Lucia, and then he disapproves the idea of sending Felsia away to a university. And then we get a scene with Elvie out cataloging the wildlife and captures a mimic lizard, but we don't get to see this on screen. A town meeting is called before the moderator arrives to address some concerns. Reeves, the lead officer of the team sent down by Mercury, announces that they are investigating the use of explosives in the bombing of the landing pad. Felsia then tells her desire to go to a university to Elvie and asks for a letter of recommendation. Elvie heads to the alien ruins and discovers a light headed away from it. She inspects closer and sees that the ruins have been disturbed and people have been here just recently. As she continues her search, she finds loose explosives. Elvie instantly goes back to Reeves to tell him what she had seen at the ruins. Reeves then tells her to stay put and that he will put together a team to investigate the ruins. Coop tells Baja that Elvie had found the explosives and told the RCE security team. They make a plan to go back to the ruins to remove the explosives and make sure they are never found, because they can implicate him and the rest of the Belter group. The Belters assemble a small team and head to the ruins. When they finally arrive at the ruins, the Belters catch the RCE security team snooping around. With the element of surprise in their advantage, Coop orders the Belters to set up an ambush for the team. They do, killing all of the RCE security team. They cover up the scene and bury the team's bodies. Baja starts to become conflicted with himself and what he's doing after he finds out that Coop set the whole thing up and he intended to kill the RCE security team in the first place. And then we head back to the Edward Israel in orbit, and in response to the sudden disappearance of the RCE team, Mercury decides to take a team and go to the surface himself. He leaves Havelock in charge of the Edward Israel while he's gone. He also orders Havelock to turn one of the shuttles into a weapon as an option. He also adds that Havelock should train a team of some of the non-military workers on the ship in case something happens and he needs boots on the ground. Havelock follows out his orders and Mercury heads to the surface in a shuttle. The Rocinante arrives at Ilus and Holden and Amos head for the surface, leaving Alex and Naomi on the ship. Alex and Naomi head back up the well and Holden and Amos head for the colony. Upon arriving at First Landing, the entire town gathers in the center to meet Holden. Carol Chiwiwi and Mercury are there to greet Holden. And Coop, the troublemaker, starts to speak out, getting the attention of the crowd despite the warning from Carol Chiwiwi. He plays off the hostility of the crowd and starts to take verbal jabs at Mercury and the RCE team. He makes a direct threat to Mercury, and Mercury responds by pulling out his gun and shooting Coop through the eye, killing him instantly. The end. My rating and parting thoughts. Okay, now it's time to rate the episode and share some parting thoughts about it. First off, let me start by saying how happy I am that this show has come back. Hell, I'm glad to even make a video about it. Not to mention that we have a Season 5 greenlit and on the way. One of the major changes I adored this season are the revival and return of Avasarala's dialogue. I love it. On the Sci-Fi Channel, she was way toned down for the network as compared to what we see in the show now. She is by far one of my favorite, if not my favorite character in the show, and she is raw as it gets in the books. Thank you, Amazon, for bringing her back to me. And I love the additional content that we get that's not in the book. As I have stated many times before, these are like Easter eggs to the book readers. Some people might argue that the better parts of the book were not put in the show, but look at it realistically. The show has a budget to follow, and the CGI is already great, and I'm sure it's not cheap. If this show had a budget along the lines of something like Game of Thrones, then we'd have a very different story, I'm sure. Did I want to see Miller in one of those hulking death machines like at the end of the book? Well, yeah, of course, but that takes a crap load of money to produce episode to episode, and I'm grateful for what we got. I'm sure it was hard enough to compress a book into one season, especially with all the TV added stuff. To get what we see in the book, they would literally need to do 2 seasons per book and have a way bigger budget to make that happen. I tell everyone that watches the show to read the books because it gives you a better insight into the overall story. So, for this episode, I'm going with 9 out of 10 stars, as it sets up what turns into be one wild ride throughout the whole season. The IMDb also rates this episode at 9 out of 10 stars, so we are both on the same page this time. I love both the scenes on Mars and Earth. Very gorgeous shots. Medina Station looks great, the pacing of the story was solid, and seriously, for almost 11 chapters of a book crushed into one episode, they did a phenomenal job. And I seriously can't wait for Book 9 and Season 5. Alright, well there you have it. This concludes my review of the Expanse's Season 4 opener, New Terra. I hope maybe I taught you a couple things, and thank you for watching. And if you like what I do, remember to like the video and drop a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell notification so you can stay informed when I release new content. But until next time, this is Ensign Rickey, your YouTube resident redshirt. This is the Lower Decks, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Peace.